What happens when the most dangerous man in the city, a man who has never once flinched at violence, watches the one person he can't live without laugh across a candlelit table at another man? Not his rival, not his enemy, his assistant, the quiet, brilliant woman who keeps his entire empire running from behind a desk. He thought he had everything under control. He thought he felt nothing. And then he saw her in a crimson dress, smiling at a stranger, and something inside him snapped clean in half. Stick around, because this is a story about a man who finally realizes what he's been blind to all along. Beatrice was the most powerful woman in the city's underworld, though absolutely nobody outside the heavy mahogany doors of the company knew it. She didn't look like the women who usually drifted through Matteo's orbit. She wasn't a towering, waif-thin model. She wasn't one of the surgically perfected cocktail waitresses from the underground casinos. Bea was a big woman, soft and full-figured, and undeniably dangerously brilliant. She wore tailored, structured blazers that fit her broad shoulders, sensible block heels, and a permanent expression of cool, professional indifference. For 5 years, Bea had been Matteo's executive assistant. In the daylight, that meant managing the logistics of his sprawling import-export empire. In the shadows, it meant something else entirely. It meant keeping the books for shipments that never appeared on any official manifest, paying off the right people at the docks, and making sure the family's millions were scrubbed spotlessly clean through a web of shell companies. Matteo was a monster wrapped in beautifully tailored Italian wool, 34, brutally handsome, carrying the kind of generational menace that made grown men stutter in his presence. He demanded absolute perfection from everyone around him, and Bea was the only person on Earth who consistently delivered it. He didn't just rely on her. He was hopelessly tethered to her. He knew exactly how she took her coffee, black, no sugar. He knew the precise rhythm of her typing when she was stressed about a delayed shipment. But he had never once looked at her as a woman. To Matteo, Bea was an extension of his own mind, a permanent, immovable fixture in his world. She belonged to him, but only in a corporate, territorial sense. Or so he told himself. It started on a gloomy Tuesday in late October. Bea had spent the better part of her morning quietly diffusing a disaster involving an intercepted truck. When she finally brought Matteo his afternoon espresso, she placed a sleek, cream-colored envelope on his desk, alongside a stack of paperwork. "The delegates agreed to your terms," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of inflection, "and I'll be leaving precisely at 5 this Friday." Matteo, in the middle of reviewing a contract, didn't look up. "Cancel whatever it is. We have visitors coming into the city Friday night. I need you here to prep the briefing documents." "I've already prepped them. They're in the blue folder on your credenza," Bea replied calmly. "I'm leaving at 5. Matteo finally lifted his dark eyes, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. Bea never left at 5. She regularly worked until midnight, matching his grueling hours out of sheer dedication. "Where are you going?" he asked, the question slipping out before his usual filter of detached authority could stop it. Bea hesitated for a fraction of a second. A faint, almost imperceptible flush crept up her cheeks. "I have a personal engagement." "A what?" "A date, Mr. Rossi." The word hung in the cold, air-conditioned office. A date. Matteo stared at her, taking in the soft curve of her jaw, the defiant glint in her hazel eyes. It wasn't that he thought nobody would want her. She had a gorgeous face, sharp wit, skin like porcelain. It was simply that the concept of Bea having a life, a romantic existence outside of him, was entirely foreign. It felt like a glitch in the system. "A date," Matteo repeated, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a dangerous, gravelly edge. "With who?" "That's my personal business," Bea said, holding his gaze with a terrifying amount of bravery. "I'll see you on Monday." When Friday rolled around, the atmosphere in the executive suite was suffocating. Matteo had been snapping at everyone all day, hurling an ashtray at a man who misreported the weekly earnings. Every time he looked through the glass partition of his office, he saw Bea. At 4:30, she disappeared into the private washroom. When she emerged at 4:50, the air was sucked entirely out of his lungs. B had completely transformed. The sensible blazer was gone. In its place was a wrap dress in a shade of deep, bruised crimson. The fabric draped over her curves, accentuating her figure. Her hair, usually scraped back into a severe bun, cascaded down her shoulders in thick, dark waves. She wore a deep red lipstick that made her mouth look impossibly soft. As she walked to the elevator, the click of her heels echoed through the silent office, and every guard in the vicinity subtly turned his head, suddenly realizing the boss's fearsome assistant was breathtaking. Matteo's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ground together. A primal, ugly, territorial instinct flared in his chest. As the elevator doors closed, swallowing her in a flash of crimson, he picked up his desk phone. "Get my car!" he barked to his driver, "and find out exactly where she's going." The restaurant was an absurdly pretentious place on the wealthy side of town, the kind of bistro where the lighting was deliberately dim, the champagne cost more than a car payment, and the waiters moved with the silent efficiency of ghosts. B sat in a velvet booth, feeling a strange mixture of exhilaration and severe anxiety. Across from her sat Arthur, an actuary she had matched with on a dating app. Arthur was perfectly nice. He was balding slightly, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and had spent the last 20 minutes talking about municipal bonds. He wasn't thrilling, but he was safe, he was legal. He was everything Matteo was not. "So, Beatrice," Arthur smiled, adjusting his glasses, "you said you work in logistics?" "Something like that," B said, taking a sip of her wine. "It's a demanding job, lots of late nights managing inventory." "Well, you must be very good at it," Arthur said, a nervous flush on his neck. "You look absolutely stunning tonight, by the way. Red is definitely your color." "Thank you, Arthur," B said, genuinely touched. She knew she was a big woman, and she carried herself with pride, but a kind compliment still felt warm. She laughed at something mildly amusing, he said, her head tipping back slightly, exposing the long column of her throat. From across the dining room, sitting in the darkest corner booth, Matteo watched that laugh. He was supposed to be having a highly sensitive meeting with the head of a rival faction, a heavy-set man currently explaining the terms of a new shipping route over the clink of silverware. Matteo didn't hear a single word. His dark eyes were locked onto B. The sight of her in that red dress, smiling for another man, was a physical torment. He watched the actuary, who looked like a stiff breeze could knock him over, lean in closer. A dark, violent jealousy erupted in Matteo's bloodstream, burning hot and thick. It wasn't just possessiveness over an employee. It was a sudden, jarring awakening. He wanted her. He wanted that sharp mind entirely focused on him. And he wanted to wrap his hands around the throat of the pathetic little man sitting across from her. "Matteo," his rival prompted, noticing his complete lack of attention. "Are we in agreement on the docks?" Matteo slowly stood, tossing a crumpled bill onto his untouched steak. "The docks are fine. Excuse me, I have a pest control issue to handle." B was just reaching for a piece of bread when the temperature at her table seemed to drop 10 degrees. The ambient chatter faded into a nervous hush. A large shadow fell over the white tablecloth. B looked up, and the breath left her body. Standing next to the table was Matteo, hands tucked casually into his pockets, but his eyes entirely feral. The lethal aura he projected was suffocating. "Mr. Rossi!" Bay gasped, her professional facade crumbling. "What are you doing here?" Matteo didn't look at her. His dead, shark-like gaze was fixed entirely on Arthur, who suddenly looked like a gazelle that had just realized it was in the presence of a lion. "You didn't introduce me to your friend." Arthur swallowed hard, shrinking back into the booth. "I'm Arthur. Arthur Pendleton, a friend of Beatrice's." He extended a trembling hand. Matteo looked at the hand as if it were a rat. He did not take it. "Arthur," he repeated, rolling the name around like a bad taste. "I'm Matteo Rossi, Beatrice's employer, and the man who currently needs her back at the office." Bia's face flushed hot with indignation. "Excuse me, I'm off the clock, Mr. Rossi. We agreed." "A crisis came up," Matteo interrupted, smoothly shifting his imposing bulk so he was physically boxing Arthur into the booth. He leaned down, placing his large, scarred hands flat on the table. A very large, very expensive shipment was seized. I need my lead coordinator. Now. Arthur looked frantically between B and the terrifying man looming over him. Well, if it's an emergency, Beatrice, I understand. We can always do this another time. No, Arthur, stay, B commanded, her hazel eyes flashing with rare fury as she glared at her boss. She lowered her voice to a furious hiss. Matteo, this is completely out of line. Whatever it is, one of the others can handle it until Monday. Matteo leaned in until his face was inches from hers. He could smell her perfume, something sweet, like vanilla and dark amber. His gaze dropped to her red lips, then flicked up to her eyes. No one else can handle it, B. You know that. He murmured it softly, the threat barely veiled beneath the velvet tone. And Arthur here was just leaving. Weren't you, Artie? He shifted his gaze back to the actuary. He didn't make a verbal threat. He didn't reveal the weapon at his ribs. He simply gave Arthur a look of such absolute promise-filled menace that the poor man practically scrambled out of the booth. Right, yes, I have an early morning, Arthur stammered, throwing money on the table and refusing to meet B's eye. Lovely meeting you, Beatrice. Good luck with the shipments. And then he was practically sprinting out the doors. B sat frozen, her chest heaving. The humiliation and rage were bubbling over. She slowly turned to look at Matteo, who was now casually sliding into the seat Arthur had vacated, looking obscenely pleased with himself. You, B breathed, her voice shaking, are a monster. I'm aware, Matteo replied, reaching over to pick up the glass of wine she'd been drinking from. He turned the glass so his lips touched the exact spot where her red lipstick had left its mark, and took a slow sip. His dark eyes locked onto hers, blazing with possessive heat. Now, let's talk about that dress, Beatrice. My dress is none of your concern, B snapped, trying to maintain her rigid posture. But the velvet booth felt impossibly small with his broad shoulders blocking her only exit. You had absolutely no right to interfere in my private life. Arthur is a respectable man. Arthur is a weak, spineless civilian who doesn't know how to look at a woman like you, Matteo growled, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. His gaze swept over the neckline of the crimson dress, the hunger in his eyes completely undisguised. He leaned closer, the scent of his cologne and danger intoxicating her. He was looking at you like you were a museum exhibit he wasn't allowed to touch. You are not a museum exhibit. B felt a flush rise from her chest all the way to her hairline. For 5 years she had buried her attraction to the ruthless boss under piles of spreadsheets and legal briefings. She was the efficient assistant. He was the untouchable king. The lines were drawn in permanent ink. But tonight, Matteo was violently scribbling outside of them. I am your employer, Mr. Rossi, he said, flipping her clutch. And I am going home. You're coming with me, Matteo countered, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. I wasn't lying about the shipment, and I'm not leaving you on the street in that dress where any desperate idiot can look at what belongs to me. B's breath hitched. What belongs to me? Before she could process the weight of that, Matteo slid out of the booth, towering over her, and offered his hand. For a moment she considered refusing, but the lethal glint in his eyes told her he was fully prepared to throw her over his shoulder and carry her out. She placed her soft hand in his large, scarred one. The heat of his skin sent a jolt straight down her spine, and he didn't let go. He pulled her firmly against his side, his arm wrapping around her waist, anchoring her to him as they walked out. The host visibly cowered, practically bowing as he held the doors open. The crisp October air hit B's face, cooling her flushed cheeks. The street was relatively quiet, bathed in amber light. Half a block down, Matteo's armored car sat idling, his driver standing at attention by the rear door. I can take a cab, B protested weakly, though she made no move to pull away from the comforting weight of his arm. "You're getting in the car, B," Matteo said, his voice softening just a fraction. He reached out and gently brushed a stray dark curl away from her cheek. The tenderness of the gesture, so foreign, so deeply out of character for the man she worked for, made her freeze. "You look beautiful tonight. So beautiful it makes me want to burn this whole city down just to keep you safe." He was looking at her lips, his head tilting down. B's heart hammered against her ribs. He was going to kiss her right here on the pavement. But the kiss never came. The deafening roar of a high-powered engine shattered the quiet night. A black SUV, its headlights completely dark, swerved violently around the corner, tires screaming against the asphalt. Matteo's survival instincts, honed over 2 decades in the bloody trenches, kicked in a fraction of a second before the windows rolled down. "Get down!" Matteo roared. He didn't just push her. He tackled her, his massive frame slamming into her, wrapping his arms around her head and shoulders, burying her under his weight as they crashed onto the cold concrete. The breath was knocked from B's lungs. The silk of her dress tore at the knee. Then came the staccato crack of automatic gunfire, echoing off the buildings. Sparks flew as bullets chewed through the brick facade above them. Diners screamed from inside. Matteo didn't flinch. Shielding her body entirely with his own, he reached under his jacket and drew his weapon in one fluid, blindingly fast motion. He rolled slightly off her, propped himself on one knee, and returned fire, his shots methodical, cold, and precise. One shattered the SUV's side mirror. The next pierced a rear tire, causing the heavy vehicle to swerve violently. Down the street, his driver had already drawn a weapon, sending a heavy spray toward the crippled SUV. Realizing they'd lost the element of surprise against a heavily armed and very dangerous man, the driver of the SUV slammed on the gas, limping down the avenue on a blown tire before vanishing into traffic. Silence crashed back down, broken only by distant sirens and terrified sobbing from inside the restaurant. Matteo immediately dropped to his knees next to B, his hands shaking, something she had never once witnessed in 5 years. He ran his hands frantically over her arms, her back, searching for blood. Beatrice, look at me," he demanded, his voice thick with panic, grabbing her face, his thumbs wiping the grit from her cheek. "Are you hit? Tell me you're not hit." "I'm fine," she gasped, struggling to sit up. Her knee was badly scraped and her dress was ruined, but there were no bullet holes. "I'm okay." "Matteo, you're bleeding." A jagged piece of shrapnel had sliced a clean line across his left arm, soaking his sleeve dark. He didn't even look at it. He hauled her to her feet, his grip on her waist like a vice, practically lifting her off the ground as he dragged her toward the waiting car. "Get in," he ordered, before diving in after her. "Get us out of here, now." The engine roared, tires spinning as the car launched into the night, leaving the bloody chaos behind. In the back seat, the adrenaline was thick enough to choke on. B was shaking violently. She had orchestrated things on paper. She had moved millions in dirty money, but she had never been caught in the crossfire. Matteo reached across the wide seat and pulled her trembling body onto his lap. He didn't care about the blood soaking his arm, nor the boundaries of their professional relationship. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the sweet vanilla scent of her perfume, his hands gripping her as if she were a lifeline. "If I had lost you," Matteo whispered, his voice cracking, a sound so raw and vulnerable it made her chest ache. "If I had lost you because I was too stupid to lock you down. Who was it?" B asked, her logistical brain desperately trying to override her terror. She rested her hands on his broad shoulders, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. "Was it the man from the restaurant? He was right there." "It was his crew," Matteo confirmed, his eyes hardening to black ice. "He kept me talking while his men set up outside. They knew I wouldn't have my full security detail for a private meeting." And then a sudden, terrifying realization hit her. "The money. Matteo," B said, her hazel eyes suddenly sharp and brilliant in the dim light. "The offshore accounts. The 20 million we were supposed to transfer tonight." "It doesn't matter," Matteo growled, his hand smoothing over her hip. "I'll deal with him by dawn. The money is gone." B's soft lips suddenly curved into a wicked, devastating smile. The fear vanished entirely from her eyes, replaced by the brilliant, ruthless intellect that made her the true power behind his empire. "No, Mr. Rossi," she whispered, her hands sliding up to cup his face. "It isn't." The car slipped silently into the secure underground garage of his building, and a private elevator carried them straight up to his sprawling penthouse. The moment the steel doors locked behind them, the absolute silence of the soundproof apartment enveloped them. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but Matteo didn't look at the view. He stripped off his ruined jacket, tossing it onto a white leather sofa, wincing as the movement pulled at the gash on his arm. B immediately went into fixer mode. She kicked off her ruined heels, ignoring the tear in her dress, and marched straight to the bathroom for the heavy trauma kit kept under the sink. "Sit down," she ordered, walking back into the living room. Matteo obeyed, sinking onto the edge of the sofa, watching her with fascinated eyes as she opened the kit and cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency. It was a deep graze from shattered glass, not a bullet. She applied antiseptic and began wrapping his arm with thick white gauze. "Explain the money, Beatrice," Matteo said softly, the adrenaline giving way to a deep, simmering awe. "I never trusted him," B said calmly, pulling the tape tight. His numbers from last quarter didn't match the tonnage he claimed to be moving. He was skimming. "I knew if you went to that meeting tonight, he'd try to blindside you." Matteo stared at her. "So what did you do?" "I set up a ghost account through a shell company overseas," B explained, looking up into his dark eyes. "When I left the office at 5, I didn't authorize the transfer to him. I wired the 20 million into our own account and locked the encryption. His men probably hit us because he checked his accounts during your dinner and realized he was empty-handed. I stole his money, Matteo." Matteo let out a low, breathless laugh, running his uninjured hand through his dark hair. She was a genius, a ruthless, brilliant, devastating genius. "You went on a date with an actuary," Matteo murmured, reaching out to grip her waist, pulling her between his spread knees. "Knowing they were going to declare war on me tonight." "Arthur was an alibi and a distraction," B admitted, her voice softening, her hands coming to rest on his chest. She looked down, suddenly feeling deeply vulnerable. "I knew you were watching me. I knew you'd have me followed. I wanted you to see me." "Why?" Matteo asked, his hands sliding up to her hips. "Because I was tired of being invisible to you," B whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. "I run your empire, Matteo. I bleed for this family. But to you, I was just a machine in a blazer, the quiet woman who balances the books." "Don't ever talk about yourself like that," Matteo snarled fiercely, his hands tightening. He buried his hands in her thick, dark hair, forcing her to look into his blazing eyes. "You think I don't see you? I haven't looked at another woman in 5 years, Beatrice. Not since the day you walked into my office." Her breath hitched. "Matteo, I didn't touch you because you were the only clean thing in my filthy, violent life," he confessed, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I thought if I tainted you with this, with me, you'd leave. But watching that man look at you tonight, it broke something in me. You are mine, B. Every brilliant thought in your head, every part of you, it belongs to me." He didn't wait for permission this time. He pulled her down and kissed her, and the kiss was explosive, tasting of expensive wine, adrenaline, and years of repressed, agonizing longing. B groaned, melting against his rock-solid frame, her arms wrapping around his neck. "You're perfect," he gasped against her jaw. "You are so beautiful." "What about him?" B breathed, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "The man who just tried to kill us." Matteo pulled back just enough to look at her, a lethal smile playing on his lips, his hand resting heavily on her hip, claiming her fully. "Let the others handle him," the ruthless boss whispered. "Tonight, I'm busy with my queen." And he kissed her again. So here's what stays with me about B's story. For 5 years, she made herself small. Not in stature, but in how she let the world see her. She poured every ounce of her brilliance into running an empire from the shadows, and the man at the top of it, the one person whose attention she craved, looked right past her every single day, treated her like furniture, like a function rather than a person. And the cruelest part is that she let him because somewhere along the way she'd convinced herself that's all she was allowed to be. The efficient one, the reliable one, the invisible one. But here's the thing, the story gets exactly right. Bey was never invisible because she was unremarkable. She was invisible because Mateo chose not to look, and because she'd stopped demanding to be seen. The moment she put on that red dress and walked out the door, she wasn't really doing it for Arthur. She was doing it for herself. She was finally saying, out loud, that she was worth noticing. And it turned out she'd been the most powerful, most indispensable person in that entire empire the whole time. The genius who saw the betrayal coming before anyone else did. The one who saved them both. There's a real lesson buried in all the drama and the gunfire. Sometimes the people who do the most, who carry the most, are the very ones the world forgets to truly see. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting to be noticed and step into the light on your own terms. If B's transformation from the overlooked assistant to the undeniable queen of the whole operation hit you right in the chest, then do me a favor and smash that like button right now. It honestly helps more than you know. Share this story with someone who loves a fierce, brilliant heroine who refuses to stay in the background a single second longer. And if you want more stories exactly like this one, packed with twists, slow burn tension, and characters who turn out to be so much more than anyone gave them credit for, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. And drop a comment down below and tell me honestly. Was B right to orchestrate that whole night the way she did? The date, the alibi, the stolen money, all of it, just to finally make Mateo see her? Or did she play a dangerous game that could have gotten them both killed? There's no wrong answer, and I genuinely want to know what you think. I read every single comment, and the best ones just might shape the next story I tell. So don't be shy, let's hear it.